This reading isn't about a dramatic moment. It's about a quiet change, the kind that happens slowly until one day it's obvious. They started noticing something change. Wasn't anger, wasn't confrontation. It was just a change in how accessible you were, in how centered they were in your world, and how they weren't getting any attention anymore. So, for the first time, they had to consider a possibility that they're not the only one that holds space anymore. So, go ahead and choose a pile you feel drawn to: pile 1, pile 2, or pile 3. We're going to start with pile 1 as usual, but go ahead and meditate on the cards if you need. All right, pile 1. This feels like assuming energy. So let's see here. I don't feel chaotic. I don't feel dramatic. It just feels like aware. This is someone who built a quiet belief system around you. Whoa. They felt like access to you was always stable. And it's not because you said that out loud, but it's because historically you were always there and you always answered. You engaged, you were open. And over time, that turned into this assumption that they always had you. I'm hearing like, I can reach them whenever I want. Not desperately, not urgently, just like a fact. This person is always there if I need them. And they believed that your emotional energy was available. Maybe not constantly, but definitely like available. And they got really comfortable with that. So this change didn't happen from a fight or like from a confrontation. It kind of happened just like with your tone with them. Like you just didn't really care anymore. There's something in here about exchanging messages. Like you respond and it's not what they think you should respond. But like technically everything's fine, but you're not leaning in the way you used to. You're not orienting your life around them like you used to. Your energy is not wrapped around them anymore. You've got Cancer and you've got Libra. And that's when something sort of changed, when they noticed that. They just read the room and they're like, And I think they're actually reading the text you guys wrote together. So they're trying to figure out where they stand in your responses, because I don't feel like they're centered anymore. There's less like warmth towards them, you know, and less cushioning too. It's neutral and it's balanced. Yeah, so there's less like warmth with them is what I'm feeling, less cushioning, you know. Here's Leo. It's neutral, it's balanced, it's self-contained. And here's the communication card. So they recognize that like they're not spiraling or anything like that. They're just sort of recalculating things. They're figuring out here the room doesn't turn just because you walk in. They're still kind, you're still open, you're still communicating with them, but you're not really like angled towards them anymore. Where at one point in your world you were, and now it's not like that anymore. So for someone who believed that they were central, that switches things, it changes, it's sobering. There's a memory here of how it used to feel. There's a memory of when you were more responsive with them, when your tone had more softness with them, when you seemed more emotional, like more attuned to them, more in tune with them, to what they were feeling, what they were thinking. And they didn't label that as being chosen. They just experienced it as, well, this is a given, duh, as like, this is the bare minimum. And now that baseline is like changed. So you respond, but you don't adjust yourself to them. You don't over accommodate. You don't make decisions based on what they want. You don't reassure them. You don't make space the same way that you used to. You're just chilling, like studying yourself. And they can feel that your energy is no longer bending to them. You're no longer making decisions based on them. This isn't jealousy. This is being aware. And there's this thought that passes through them like, oh, I'm not the only one in their vision anymore. I'm not the only one they care about anymore. And I don't even mean that in like a bad way necessarily. It could be your goals. It could be your focus, your self-respect, your just growing as a person, you know? Something else holds weight in your life now. Something else gets your emotional investment, and they're not like excluded entirely. They're just not the center of your world anymore. Feels like this person had like re-entry privileges. That's what it feels like they think they had. Didn't matter, even if time passed, even if celebrations happened, they could step back in and you would go back towards them. And now when they step forward, you don't change, and they feel like they need to work on something. They need to change something about themselves. Because to them, you're looking like you're occupied, you're grounded, you're in your own world. You have your own star moment here. It's not loud, it's not painful, it's just like obvious. Because there's some maturity in how they process this. This person's not lashing out. They're not accusing. They're not creating a scene. They're just sitting with the realization that your emotional space is not revolving around them anymore. And you're responsive. Okay, so you're responsive to them, but like I said, you're not circling them. You're available, but not waiting. You're open, but not centered. And that is sort of noticeable to them. They feel the difference. So I'm hearing they don't need me the same way that they used to. And that thought isn't dramatic. It's grounding. And it means that the dynamic has changed between you two. You're no longer someone they assumed that would remain available and receptive anymore. You're someone with your own access and your own momentum. This pile feels like a quiet, like sort of, so yeah, they always thought you would remain like receptive to them. Didn't matter what was going on in your life. But now you have your own life, your own momentum. So this pile feels like a status shift. Like they're not losing you. Got Capricorn here. They're losing the assumption that they're automatic in your life. And there's something humbling about that. It forces them to see you as a person, not just someone who's there for them, waiting for them, you know? Just living your own life. And for the first time, they understand that they are one part of your world, not the center of it. And that's the recalibration I was talking about. Not panic, not drama, just recognizing. And once they see that, they can't unsee it. Follow us into pile 2. Let's see if you can resonate with that one. Bye. Pile 2. This feels like a comfortable person. Let's get into it. I'm just going to start shuffling and just sort of talk through whatever comes out. So this person didn't lose you in a loud, obnoxious way. They didn't wake up one day in panic. They just woke up to like extra space. And at first they didn't really notice it because they were used to you being the one that bridged things. Yeah, right there. You were the one that was checked in. You were the one that smoothed things over. Cancerian energy. You were the one that made sure that emotional thread never snapped. And they got too comfortable inside that. Not maliciously, not dramatically, just kind of like accustomed. I'm hearing that they genuinely believed that the dynamic ran to the ground on its own. But it didn't. It's because you were pulling all the weight. And so the change for them started small. They noticed that they hadn't heard from you in a way that they normally would. You go from the Ace of Swords to Two of Swords. So there was like one day and then another day, no talking. And then they just kept telling themselves, oh, well, they're just busy. That's all. and then Three of Cups. But in the past, when you were busy, you would still circle back to them. You would still maintain warmth. So they knew something was still different. So this time when you didn't, they were like, but what are they doing? So I'm just going to wait. That's what they say to themselves here. And this is where the like delayed recognition comes in. So at first they didn't really feel replaced or anything like that. They didn't feel a threat because they didn't realize that something was really changing. They just felt like things were at a pause, at a standstill. Knight of Wands. They just felt like it was a temporary lull and you would just restart. And you didn't though. So that's when this recalibration started. So there's this energy coming out of like scrolling through messages, not obsessively, not spiraling, just reviewing and noticing something really uncomfortable. You initiated most of it and they were like, shit. You asked the deeper questions. You opened emotional space. You steered the tone and they just responded. They enjoyed it, but they also didn't put work in it. They were just benefiting from it. So this person noticed when you stopped compensating for that because the silence was loud. It wasn't like a big argument. Like I said, it was just sort of obvious. So I keep feeling this moment where they go to reach out and then they just pause. And then they realize they don't actually know how to initiate things the way that you did. They're used to responding. They're used to being emotionally met. Eight of Wands. They're not used to building things. This is where the awareness lands. They're not the only one in your field here. Like, you know, they know they're not the only one in your life. Because if they were, you would obviously still be orbiting them. And that's the logic that sort of gives them a reality check. So this person began to understand that you have options, that you're capable of investing your time elsewhere, and that your attention isn't just automatic. And it's not anger that hits them. It's like a perspective change. It's kind of like sadness, actually, sort of grief. It's recognition, but with grief, you know? This feels like they realized they were finally being emotionally supported more than they realized, you know, because the connection was so easy for them though, because you were doing all the work. And when that stopped, they felt the weight of everything. So I'm seeing them sort of sit with this, you know, 10 of Swords, no dramatic texting, no ego reaction, 6 of Cups here, just sitting with it. They're replaying the conversations and realizing like how often you actually extended yourself, how often you softened things, King of Cups, how often you held the emotional temperature steady. You know what I mean? Like, does that make sense? Because they begin to see here that they were comfortable being the taker. They weren't giving in return. But they didn't feel safe enough to stretch, you know? And now they're aware that you're not reaching out to them anymore. So this is where the exclusivity kind of dissolves. Like, this is where they realize they weren't your only thing going on in your life. You know what I mean? And 4 of Pentacles, they assumed that your effort was steady with them. They assumed that they had time, that this connection would maintain itself and they wouldn't have to do work. But it didn't, because you stopped maintaining it. Like, you stopped putting all the effort in, and then they weren't putting in any effort. So then it just dissolved. So if someone else is receiving your emotional depth, love, your curiosity, if someone else is being met the way they were being met, then they are no longer the only one. And what's interesting is this doesn't create chaos inside of them. It creates like them being a bit embarrassed. They're acknowledging it internally, and they realize they were giving less than they thought they were, and that they were just sort of coasting on you. 5 of Swords, Queen of Pentacles. Emotional insecurity. Like, they were so I don't know, there was no equality here. Like, there was embarrassment here. They weren't ashamed, but they were like definitely embarrassed. Knight of Pentacles. They're starting to notice that like you withdrawing wasn't random. It was mood based. It wasn't mood based actually. You just stopped compensating and you stopped filling the silence when there was silence. You stopped being that initiator. And that stillness had to face, that made them have to face what they were offering and what they were bringing to the table, which obviously wasn't much. They didn't see it when you were busy juggling it all, but they see it now. And they're seeing that they're not centered anymore. And it's coming from feeling your absence of effort, obviously, right? And that's what gave them the reality check. They recognize that, the Two of Cups, that attention is an exchange. And if they weren't exchanging, then they weren't anchoring. You weren't pulling away in anger. You weren't pulling away to teach them a lesson. You were just literally redistributing your energy. And that's mature. That's intentional. And they feel that. There's this like acceptance here that they understand that if they want to remain important in your life, they would actually have to participate and put work in. They would have to initiate. They would have to hold space for you and your emotions too. And they would have to contribute too. And that awareness is very quiet. Four of Wands. No fireworks, no confrontation, just natural consequences coming to light. Because the relationship they had was built on your effort. And when that stopped, they had to see themselves for what they were. And they're not automatically centered in your world. So they've realized they're not guaranteed this emotional access you offer. So they've been humbled. This Five of Pentacles, they've been humbled. Knight of Pentacles. And they've seen this connection differently from here on out. Follow us into pile 3. Let's see if we can get you some more answers. Bye. Pile 3, welcome. Okay, so this pile, this feels like a distance. I don't know. Distancing themselves. This person built their entire sense of safety around space. Not because they didn't feel anything, but because feeling too much felt dangerous, felt scary. So they learned how to lean back, how to wait, how to let you come forward first. They told themselves that distance was maturity and that they were strong because they could stay far away. And they thought that actually kept them balanced. And it seems like that did work. You reached, you checked in, you chased them. You softened any awkward moments. You bridged all that weird silence. And there's always this like unspoken understanding that you would fix that awkwardness. And they sat in that comfortably, The change didn't really happen in a dramatic moment. It happened over time when something familiar happened it's something familiar happened that stopped happening. So you didn't overextend. You didn't text first. You didn't smooth over that awkward energy. You just matched them. You didn't offer to do something that you would normally offer. They assumed you were busy and that you would just circle back because you always had. But then days passed and months passed and that space stayed. And what they began to notice wasn't really anger. It wasn't jealousy. It was kind of sadness. They felt like, oh, I lost this person and I can never get him back. And then it felt even. They're like, I didn't even thank them for that baby shower they gave me. I didn't thank them for when they brought me flowers when I was, in a hard time. This person felt like they were a little bit more in control of the pace because they can see what's going on now. This person this person knew you weren't gone. You just weren't really like available to them anymore. There's this very specific moment where they went to reach out to you, not out of like urgency. They just really wanted to tell you something. And they just felt like they couldn't because they felt like you guys weren't friends anymore. You guys weren't connected anymore. And they felt like they were almost a burden to you now. This person couldn't really sense that emotional tether anymore that used to reassure them that they were still central in your life. I feel like this person also had a big life change too. Queen of Swords. This person is no longer being prioritized. They were sad that they were losing you and that their lack of effort created this. They thought that their distance was like protecting them and that they, that they weren't good enough almost. And when you mirrored it, they felt that this distance was painful. It felt like two people just standing, like on separate grounds, neither one stepping forward. And there's this maturity now, but there's also so much distance now that you guys almost can't really fix things. They're noticing that this dynamic that they maintained or they thought they were maintaining is over. Like they don't have the upper hand anymore. There's like this quiet withdrawal when things get too intimate, and it only worked because you kept going. You didn't let it bother you. And now there's this like emotional center that just feels like gone, less defined, like you've moved on, and like they don't have attention from you anymore. And it may not even be like about another person. It's just, you might be focusing on yourself now, redistributing your own energy. You're not waiting in the same way as you were. You're not scanning for their cues anymore. You're changed. You're not changing your availability around them anymore. And that's unfamiliar. Even like meetups with you guys now are awkward. They thought that if you guys were detached, it meant you were more stable and that you could always come back together. See that? And they also realized that they could be replaced now. And when someone doesn't actively step in or step up, that space doesn't stay empty forever, especially with someone as amazing as you. So that just sort of feels exposing and very sad, because this person's having to sit with the fact that they're just one participant in your world. They're not like as close to you as they were once. And they don't know if they can ever get there again. This is just one person in your whole world. And there's this like quiet sadness in that recognition, because now if they want closeness, they would have to move. They would have to risk being the one who leans in. They would have to give up this safety of being like, I don't know, independent. This isn't panic. This is awareness. They see this. They see that like their distance was a problem, and they actually had to be present to be, in your life. And they're very sad that they're not in your life anymore. And it's a realization that like they're working on, and it makes them very uncomfortable and sad, but they are working on it. Thank you so much for spending your energy with me. Let me know if this resonates with you. I'll see you in the next reading. Bye.